Eytu Fingazu. So, I hear Coco Doll is in a pinch. Within a dimly lit room with a round table that had 8 chairs, the chairs each had an individual seated on it. A few of these individuals were robed hiding their identity and there were a few who didn't bother. One of these individuals, the one who spoke, was a man with a bald head, his skin a shade of brown and his stature was big with thick muscled arms. He had tattoos on his head, arms, and chest. Quite, you wouldn't mind lending me a hand, wouldn't you, Zero darling? Coco Doll, a man with a very feminine voice and physique. Far away one would think he is a woman, but once they get close the face would tell them otherwise. Despite the lipstick and makeup, his face was that of a man and the way he spoke was sultry and seductive, much like Seductress. Coco Doll was one of the 8 leaders within the organization known as 8 Fingers, an organization that dabbles in various types of less than legal businesses, from gambling to drug trade, weapons trading to slave trading, legal and prostitution, as well as information brokering and gambling. They also had a few merchants under their banner that posed as a front and helped smuggle things out and into the country. The organization 8 Fingers was quite large, spanning the entire kingdom of Re-Estais and even reaching the Baharuth Empire and all the way to the slain theocracy. Coco Doll himself was the leader of the slave trade department of the organization. Before I do that, I'm going to need some info, and don't be surprised if my services are a little steep in price. Zero stated while leaning forth from his chair and smiling widely. As the one who runs the underground security organization 6 Arms, he was also in charge of protecting the various business of his also underground business partners. Don't worry dear, my pockets are still deep, I'm just having a slight inconvenience at the moment. Glad to hear it. Should I come to you or will you contact me? I'll have my people contact your people and take it from there. Coco Doll responded, earning a nod from Zero, who then laid back on the backrest of his chair. With Zero's help the pest should be taken care of, and although he'll have to inform Zero to capture them rather than kill them, they may be ruining his business, but beautiful women like the leader of Blue Rose would fetch a high price. Well, moving on, this meeting was called because of the monthly progress report, so we may coordinate with each other if it seems one of us has an opportunity that might benefit us. We'll also be discussing the thing that happened to Yggdrassil a month ago. An elderly man with a bushy mustache and shining silver hair spoke. He was wearing very civilized clothing that was reminiscent of nobility. This man was Noah Zweden, a leader of the gambling department. His eyes looked at the other on the table with a competitive glint and a feeling of rivalry. 8 Fingers as an organization weren't really a united company, but instead it was more like an 8-headed hydra, with each head doing everything for its own gain, only working with the others when there's profit to be gained. As such, none of the leaders trusted each other, or rather their trust was purely based on profit, which for many was more reliable and secure than trust based on faith. Right, I do have something or someone that might interest a lot of you. It was a woman who spoke. She had dirt blonde hair that stretched past her shoulders, her figure tall but looked to be frail and seemed weak, with her skin being a tad too pale. She was average in her looks, but she had a certain seductiveness to her that was alluring, even to the people in this room. She was Hilma Signaeus. She was the leader of the drug trade department but also dabbled within the realm of prostitution, owning a few brothels in the capital. Oh, you have something for us, Hilma? Yes, recently a rather high-class client visited one of my brothels in the outskirts of the capital. They're very rich and have an insatiable appetite. They requested blonde and green-eyed women, so, Coco Doll, what do you say? Oh. Hilma darling, I knew you were looking out for me. Of course, I have plenty of those. Does he want foreigner from the neighborhood? Coco Doll asked in delight. Such an opportunity was something he needed. His pockets are deep, but the nuisances that have been pestering him lately have stopped the cash flow of his business a bit. It's best to not be too foreign. He has an obsession with a certain adamantite adventurer. Oh, how interesting. Do you think this client is interested in buying instead of renting? Things just took a turn for the better. Just when he was thinking of having Zero capture her, Hilma comes in telling her that there's a high-class client that has an obsession and would be more than happy to pay a large sum of money for her. Today was his lucky day. Don't be greedy, but I'm doubtful. All right, I won't be. I am looking forward to our partnership. How much would be your cut? I believe about 25% of the profit should be reasonable. Coco Doll pondered for a bit before accepting the terms. 25% was quite the sum, but at the same time he understood that he was in no position to haggle and complain. If he did, that would showcase that his pockets weren't as deep as he claimed, and that is a weakness. He must never forget that these people were not his friends, and no matter how friendly they appeared, they would happily screw him over any day of the week. Now then, moving on. Yggdrassil, I'm sure you all are aware of what happened there a month ago. Noah moved the topic of conversation now that there seemed to be no more business deals that needed to transpire. Of course he felt a bit jealous, as his own business has been sort of stagnant these past months. Of course, there was an undead army of some sorts that nearly destroyed the city. A few of my brothels were affected, but it was hardly anything to worry about. Another man spoke with an overweight face and had the look of an honest merchant. He was a bit heavy-set as there was a thick layer of fat around his waist. The man was Christopher Olsen, and a leader of the department focused on smuggling things in and out of the country. What's there to discuss then? One city being nearly destroyed shouldn't be enough to affect our businesses. Zero stated that what he said was true, as an organization as large as they were, a single city that was nearly destroyed was not something that would halt their operations. That is true, Zero, darling, but that incident may be a business opportunity for all of us, considering that now the city is at its weakest and the people are desperate. Crocodile is right. However, at the same time, Yggdrassil is being closely observed, and entering and leaving it has become very strict, so we need to find a way to properly seize it without much fuss. Hilma explained and gained a few nods from the silent members on the table. For the most part, leaders of this organization were content with making profit illegally. However, there was the problem of having to constantly move and change places when they were discovered where they were operating, and that uses up resources and money. But the organization as a whole has the necessary manpower to undermine the military power of the kingdom, and knowing the nobles, they would never begin to ask for help from Baharuth and the theocracy, not to mention that both the Holy Kingdom and the Dragon Kingdom don't have the manpower to spare, making it easy for them to take over Yggdrassil, with the only adversary being the kingdom itself without anyone to help it. However, for the time being, their forces are spread out throughout the country and cannot act as a unit. It's as Hilma says, as such we'll use some of the information we have on the nobles to blackmail the Viscount in charge of the city. That should allow our forces to infiltrate. However, there's a problem that we need to take care of first before all this could happen. Noah explained and mentioned something that got the attention of everyone in the room. I assume you're talking about the dog of the princess, the swordless swordsman. Yes, that little wretch of a princess has been a thorn to me ever since that whole debacle of trying to ban slavery. While she failed, she still managed to have a lot of restrictions imposed on it. It would have been fine if she remained a princess with little to no power, but now that she has a pawn, I'm sure she'll use it to its fullest capability. Crocodile expressed, his voice switching very quickly from feminine to masculine as he spoke with clear hatred for Princess Renner. Due to interference from Renner, the king got the bright idea to decrease the amount of debt a person can get before they can be considered for slavery, and outlawed the idea of using children as collateral for the debt. Before one can be a slave, they are given the opportunity to pay around 50% of the debt if they want to stay free. However, the king lowered that to 25% and added an extra 6 months for the indebted to collect the funds. These are things that struck a blow to Crocodile's steady cash flow, not to mention child slaves were the most profitable. Yes, according to the rumors, not only did he hold off an army of undead with relative ease by himself, but he took down a skeletal dragon, and some of our spies in the royal castle say he is considered to be much stronger than Gazef Stranov. So, we either get rid of him or have him join us, is that it? Zero surmised, and the other members gave him silent nods. However, personally he felt he needed to take a crack at him first and understand his true strength. Zero believed himself to be stronger than Gazef Stranov. As such, this dog of the princess should make for good challenge, although he will have to finish up his business with Crocodile before that. Anyone watching Kaiju number 8? Or mission, Yozakura family? There's like 10 chapters ahead on patrol, plus some other stuff I wrote that I never posted here. By the way, the pledge is $5. I mistakenly said it like that when I first created my Patreon, and I have been unable to lower it ever since, so not need to actually go to my Patreon if you don't want to pay that much or just can't afford it. Your support on this site is enough and very appreciated. You are a champion that will achieve all their goals. Patreon.com, Young Master Dio, no spaces. Shinam _ sensational creators thoughts. 8 comments, 0 vote. New chess piece. The sound of blades clashing echoed in the air, as two individuals were locked in combat. Gazef Stranov ducked beneath the sword slash aimed at his head, dodging by a wide margin, then swung his own sword aimed at Arthur's torso, only to miss as Arthur quickly jumped back, avoiding the attack. However, Gazef pressed on and attacked, this time going for a thrust that Arthur parried easily, but Gazef was not done. He moved closer, getting a bit too close, forcing Arthur to step back to open distance. However, Gazef had used his foot to trip up Arthur by inserting his foot between his legs and block Arthur's right foot from moving back, and he planned to swing at him once his balance was lost. However, even though he tripped Arthur, the blonde knight pulled back his left leg and managed to stop himself from falling back. He then used the same leg to push himself forward, this time forcing Gazef to jump back and opening a distance between them. Arthur pushed on the attack, once again clashing the sword in his hand with the one held by Gazef. The warrior chief parried the attack, but before he could counter, Arthur was quick to recover and swung again. But Gazef once again blocked the attack and went in for a counter-attack by knocking Arthur's sword to the side, forcing him to expose his right flank, and Gazef capitalized on that and swung his blade, but Arthur was quick. He jumped back and opened the distance once again. Gazef didn't give chase but instead stood on his position, panting. Their bout has been going on like this for a couple of hours now, and neither of them have landed any decisive attack. It seems that this might take quite some time, won't it? Gazef spoke, in between breaths as beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. His arms were feeling quite tense and his grip on the sword felt slippery and difficult to hold, and from what he could see he couldn't tell if it was the same for Arthur. The man didn't even seem to be sweating that much. So, it would seem, Gazef. Arthur answered whilst letting out a deep sigh. He felt a bit guilty at the moment, while Gazef was giving it his all and using the years of swordplay that he cultivated and had earned him the title of strongest knight of the king. Arthur was basically cheating. With ultra instinct, as long as he could perceive it he could counter and dodge it. There was nothing that could harm him if it was not fast enough to exceed his own perception. It also did not help that UI enhanced to his sixth sense, allowing him to be able to dodge things that he cannot technically see. However, the weakness was speed. UI doesn't mean you can dodge everything, it just means your body moves on instinct, allowing you to dodge an attack without putting much thought into it. However, if the person is faster or stronger than you, then they'll still be able to land attacks. After all, Jiren gave Goku a run for his money despite Goku using UI. But I have to admit that, in pure swordplay you're superior. If I was, I would have won already, but it's clear that isn't the case. Gazef refuted and smiled a bit. Truthfully, he was feeling a bit elated. The last time he felt challenged like this was during the finals of the Tournament of Rounds, and that was years ago. Another thing that made him feel excited was the fact that Arthur seemed to have an impenetrable defense regardless of how many feints he throws at him. The guy just seems to be able to defend against them even though he fell for them. Gazef had the sense that Arthur was holding back and was keeping things even. For what reason? He did not know. No, wait, is it? Gazef began to chuckle before he started laughing. He could not believe that he hadn't figured it out when it was so obvious and transparent. Arthur looked at the man with confusion. He could not begin to guess what was so funny. Perhaps Gazef was reminded of something funny that happened to him a lot back on Earth. After a few seconds of laughing, Gazef then spoke. Of course, it makes sense now, Sir Arthur. Your swordplay revolves around tiring out your opponent and then pressing the charge once they've become tired and sloppy, isn't it? This was their second spar this month since they're both are busy with their duties and do not have much free time, or rather Gazef hardly has free time despite having designated days to relax. Guarding the king is a full-time job. However, he was also certain that this past month Arthur has been busy as well. The princess has been making him build up his reputation and he even got the moniker of swordless swordsman. You got me. Arthur held up his hands in the air as if he was giving up. Truthfully, Arthur had no idea what Gazef was talking about, but it was better to play it off like he knew. The fact of the matter is that Arthur is actually trying to learn swordsmanship from Gazef without anyone being the wiser. He did not know any sword techniques himself, so he had to learn something to keep up the visage of being a skilled swordsman. Couple that with your quick reflexes and perception, then you got yourself a strong defense. Quite the technique you have there. Gazef praised, and Arthur noted that Gazef was extremely perceptive, meaning that the chief warrior was carefully studying Arthur's movement as they sparred and was able to somewhat decipher the way Arthur was fighting. Good eye, Gazef. You got the eye of a swordsman, the better swordsman between us clear. Ha ha. No need to be modest, Sir Arthur. Gazef was quickly interrupted by a servant of the castle who approached the two of them. The servant was a young man wearing a butler's uniform and carried himself with a graceful posture as he walked. Hearing his name, Arthur turned his head toward the one calling him, giving Gazef an apology for the interruption. Excuse me for the interruption, sirs, but may I have a word with Sir Arthur? The butler asked, and Gazef could only nod before taking his leave and bidding Arthur farewell. He could see that the blonde knight was less than pleased by what happened. His tired sigh spoke volumes. This wasn't the first time a servant has asked for an audience, and in the past month Arthur has been plagued by a few of such occurrences, but it was still annoying. His accomplishments in Yggdrassil seemed to be more of a curse than a boon. Gazef could not help but be reminded of his early days as the Sword of the King. With Gazef leaving Arthur, he was once again faced with the dreaded pests that are the nobles. He wondered what this one wanted. There was only two options: this servant was an assassin or an envoy. What is it? Excuse me for my rude interruption, sir, but Marquis Boulop wishes to have an audience with you. In the span of 4 weeks, roughly 5 nobles have either tried to eliminate him or tried to recruit him. As he understands it, those that want him gone are the nobles from the royal faction, a side that is loyal to the royal family more to the king than anybody else. They might want him dead because Arthur is a knight that can compete with Gazef and that gives the princess enough power to possibly form a coup d'etat. With the backing of the Ainz family and help from Lycaeus, a member of that family, and an adamantite rank adventure, the princess forming a coup is not impossible. Lead the way, my dude. So far, Marquis Raven, a noble that Arthur believes is the second smartest individual in the castle, with Renner being the first, has yet to contact him. From what he understands is that the Marquis was an opportunist, as such he is most likely to bide his time and wait. Regardless, none of them would manage to either kill him or bribe him. In all honesty, all these nobles just wanted his strength. Granted, Renner wants the same thing, but the difference is that 1. Is Renner a woman and likes her, and 2. Why would he go from a person that wants him for his power to another person who wants him for the same thing, and they aren't even hot women, just old men. Prince Nazzarick took a bite off a biscuit as found himself relaxing on his seat, letting the full weight of his size loose onto the couch and foregoing his pasture for the moment. Like always, the blonde-haired Marquis that is Raven was seated opposite of him with a coffee table separating them. Tell me, Marquis, why is that we aren't trying to get Sir Arthur on our side? Because it seems to me that my brother might get him before us. The prince voiced, demanding an answer from his ally. It was a reasonable concern for the prince. After all, Arthur was a new piece in the chessboard that everyone sought to command. With his strength, not only would he bolster the military strength of the kingdom by at least 1,000, but he would be a great tool for intimidation. Plus, his growing reputation among the masses will translate well into political power. His accomplishment in the attack of Yggdrassil had already put him in the eyes of many, but his recent feat of slaying the giant basilisk, a creature that many adventurers struggle with, was one that established him as the next big thing. In fact, Nazzarick would not be surprised if other forces in the kingdom are already gunning to either kill him or have him join them. We need patience, Your Majesty. While Prince Barbro may be the first prince and has a fair amount of wealth to throw at Sir Arthur, he certainly has a limit, one that he won't cross. His attitude towards commoners will never allow him to give a commoner more than what he believes they deserve, meaning he'll offer a subpar sum that Arthur will not take. Even if he does offer the right amount, Prince Barbro doesn't not respect Arthur, and I believe that is why he won't accept any offer that the prince tries to negotiate. I suppose that is true, but Marquis Boulop can remedy that by talking to Arthur by himself. Given his history, he should be able to convince Arthur to join his cause. The prince explained, Arthur was a warrior, someone whose main job is to slay and vanquish foes and monsters, and Marquis Boulop was the same for a period of time in his youth. As such, to the prince it made sense that the Marquis would understand the wants and desires of a warrior, and unlike Gazef, Arthur doesn't seem to be driven by a sense of patriotism and respect for the royal family as such, that makes it easier for Boulop to convince him. Again, what you say is true, Your Majesty. However, putting Sir Arthur in the same category as every warrior out there is also not a good approach. Boulop puts too much stock on his days as warrior in this kingdom, on this continent. What is true for warriors in this continent might not be true for warriors elsewhere. Hence why we need not assume things for Sir Arthur, but instead let him tell us what he wants. By just throwing money at him, we are just proving to him that we value not him but his strength, and that he as an individual is not relevant, something that we will avoid. I see. Placing his hand on his chin, the prince thought deeply about what the Marquis had just told him. However, his deep contemplation was interrupted by a knock on his door. Enter. The prince answered absent-mindedly. The door opened, and the princess entered. A smile was plastered onto her face as her maid closed the door behind and gave the people some privacy. Plotting to steal my knight from me, EY brother? She asked, half joking and half serious. The Marquis stood up and gave a bow, which the princess dismissed with a wave of her hand. Entering without so much as greeting. What happened to your manners, dear sister? He asked, and she strained a smile as she looked at him. He did not deny her accusation and instead changed the subject, so she did the same. Last month, my knight, along with members of Blue Rose, captured one of the people responsible for the attack on Yggdrassil, correct? She said with a surprising amount of elation when she spoke the phrase, my knight, something the Marquis found odd. Nazzarick gave her a nod but found himself curious about why she seemed interested in that matter. Currently Khajiit was within their custody and has been very uncooperative with sharing information about his organization, and torture was entirely unreliable, so for the moment they're taking a break from all that. Then would you be willing to take me to see the prisoner? I have something to ask him. The two men in the room glanced at each other, with the prince silently demanding an answer from the Marquis and Raven silently showing his own confusion at Nazzarick. Turning his head toward his sister once more, the prince asked. What makes you think you can get him to talk when we couldn't? Oh, I don't want information. I just want to have a word with him, that's all. Both the men immediately thought that her answer was a lie. They refused to believe that was all she wanted from the prisoner, and there must be a deeper purpose. Then why did you wait this long to have your word? Because I wished to wait until I was certain he would be no danger to me, plus I wished to be out your hair while you worked. She explained, and Nazzarick's suspicions were not alleviated. He was very much aware of her character as such, he knew there was a deeper reason for this, but he failed to think what it could be. Very well, sister. However, a fair warning, the dungeon isn't a friendly place for maiden, but then again, that should not be a problem. Nazzarick agreed. If she really had a deeper reasoning behind this, then he figured it would be best to just let her have it and see what it is. Prince Nazzarick was, however, overthinking things as this time. The reason for her actions were not some plot or scheme. At her brother's words, Renner could only strain a smile before turning her back and leaving. I'll be changing into something appropriate. Wait for me. Thoughts on the chapter? Or perhaps there are ideas you wish to share? Please share MSN. When you stand next to Sexy Red, I believe you see two bad bitches. Did Kendrick Lamar cook Drake or nah? 8 comments 0 vote. The Dungeon. The dungeon was a place where a variety of criminals within the kingdom were kept and confined. These criminals were of the same type, hardened criminals such as rapists, murderers and individuals who partook in financial scams that affected the lives of a majority of the people within the kingdom. There were other criminals as well, such as spies from other countries, fallen nobles and knights caught taking bribes from criminal organizations such as Eight Fingers. The Re-Estais Kingdom had 2 locations with which criminals were held. There was the southern prison King's Cage, a place where low non-priority criminals were held and kept for as long as they are needed, and the dungeon, which was located directly under the castle itself. Of course the dungeon was not large and was kept small so to not collapse the castle. Renner having stepped foot onto the dungeon, and her nose caught the smell of urine and blood. The walls were dirty with some parts of it painted with dried blood. The princess had changed the attire that she usually wears and wore a plain one-piece dress that was colored dirt brown. The dress was seemingly made from rags. She also wore low-heeled shoes made from cow skin and had her lustrous blonde hair neatly tied into a nice, neat bun. She was accompanied by both her brother with 10 guards, 5 in front and 5 in the back. The dungeon was dark with no light from the sun reaching to its halls, creating a situation where torches were necessary to see. As she walked the halls moving towards the cell of her target, she could not help but note that the dungeon had a less dreary and hopeless feel to it. Of course it was still very much like that, but she had expected the atmosphere to be much worse, something fitting of a true dungeon rather than just a prison imitating a dungeon. I smell perfume. Oh, shit, it's a woman. Yeah right, I bet it's the guards messing with us. Nah, I'm sure it's a woman. I used to work for a nobleman, I know what noble women's perfume smells like. Finally, something to touch myself for. The prisoners sounded, as they began to converse without even being able to see each other. Each cell was made with no window and had iron doors with only a single closed slit at the middle of the door that opens from the outside to slide in food. Renner could not help but feel disgusted with such a place, and not only that, but she was disappointed to know that the captives were livelier than they should. Clearly whoever oversaw this place could not do their job well. I say brother, you seem to be treating the captives better than I expected. She voiced, although her words were not meant as a compliment. Among her siblings Nazzarick was the one with most responsibilities. It should be Barbaro who was the crown prince, but he was too concerned with getting the throne and doing whatever to care about anything that wasn't appealing to him. Despite being a candidate for being king, Nazzarick was too soft. It was obvious he would end up like her father, a good king but weak and too fearful of retaliation from the nobles, not to mention keeping an opportunist like Raven by his side would not bode well. As such she thought that she herself was the only option. A half-decent option like Nazzarick was someone she was willing to let be king as long as they had an agreement about the things concerning her marriage. However, that was before she had Arthur. I believe that is a good thing. After all, these are people. Just because we must torture them to get information doesn't mean they deserve to be treated terribly, and besides a few of them easily confessed the moment we mentioned torture. Nazzarick explained, having understood what her words meant. He had always figured that she was a bit off, but he never thought she was a sadist as well. Is that so? I suppose I misjudged you. That was all that was spoken as they traversed deeper into the dungeon. Renner for the most part has always held the idea that being a ruler was more trouble than it was worth. Despite how it may look, she was quite selfish, and compromising on her desire just to placate the nobles seemed very unappealing. In fact, throughout her life she has lived without an ounce of power or control. The only thing she could ever do was compromise. She didn't like how people seemed to force the image of the Golden Princess upon her, but she had to compromise and use it to her advantage. She didn't like how she had no choice on who to marry. There she couldn't even compromise, just delay it as long as she can, but now with Arthur she didn't need to compromise. Her research into the religion of the slain theocracy has led her to find out some interesting things. As such, she needs someone like Khajiit to tell her what she needs to hear. After a long walk of silence with the sounds of the captives talking and joking about as the background noise, Renner and Nazzarick finally made it to where Khajiit was kept. The guards entered first to ensure that the prisoner was bound to the chains properly. After that was done, the 2 royals entered. Is it time for another session? Try as you might, you'll get nothing from me. Khajiit spoke first. His entire body was bound to the wall by chains that held him in place. His hands and feet were locked in iron glove-like cages. As a necromancer and mage, his hands were dangerous, but also his eyes were covered to make sure he can't see. The guards had taken out his gag to allow him to speak. Afraid not. That's scheduled for a later date, but my sister is here to ask you some things. The cell smelt of blood and burnt flesh mixed with urine body odor. It was a horrid smell that had assaulted the princess's nose quite unexpectedly, forcing her to have to put her handkerchief to her nose. It was unpleasant. She could tell that the one who tortured the captives had utilized high-grade healing potions in order to be able to repeat the torture endlessly, and that was the reason Khajiit looked unharmed. Good afternoon, Khajiit Dale Bodental, it's a pleasure to meet you. I just have some questions concerning the doctrine of the slain theocracy. You wouldn't mind answering my questions, would you? Humph. If you thought a woman was enough to get me to talk, then you're even more foolish than I thought. Get on with the torture already. Khajiit answered with annoyance in his voice. Hearing the gentle voice of a woman after a month of torture had reminded him of his mother, but he still won't say anything. Of course, Suranorn was an organization that only helped in his research. He held no loyalty to it at all. However, if he gives up the information about the organization, then his death was guaranteed. Of course, he was not afraid of death, or rather he doesn't want to die here, as that meant he won't return as an undead. His ultimate goal was to become a lich and spread death across the continent. Is that so? Renner smiled as she heard those words. It was a good thing she was wearing disposable clothes. Check out my Patreon, there's some free stuff there. Like one-shots of fanfics and originals. Check out my Patreon. At www.patreon.com, Young Master Dio. Shinam_sensational creators thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Shinam_sensational. Download app now. I am a warrior. Arthur entered the room, and the butler closed the doors behind him. The knight was met with 2 figures. Prince Barbaro, who remained seated as he gave Arthur a glare that he could only interpret as a form of displeasure. The other figure was Marquis Bulup, who stood beside the prince, maintaining a calm demeanor before opening his mouth to speak. Ah, Sir Arthur, please have a seat. Would you like a drink? Arthur resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the man. It was the typical display of hospitality. Honestly, he wished they'd all get to the point quicker rather than waste time. Giving a nod, the Marquis then poured him a glass of red wine, handing it to him and taking a seat. I do hope we did not interrupt you in the middle of something. No, it's fine, I would not dare keep His Majesty waiting, so what is the matter you wish to discuss with me? Arthur decided to cut to the chase, rather than listening to a nobleman ramble on about whatever nonsense that would eventually lead to him getting to the main point after minutes of pointless drivel. How does it feel to be Knight of the Princess? Arthur once again felt the need to roll his eye. The Marquis seemed determined not to get to the point of this meeting. Why does that matter? Well, as you know, women, while complicated and hard to understand, they can never grasp the true mind of a man. We are equally as complicated, perhaps a lesser extent, but still complicated nonetheless. Yes, that's a given. What are you getting at, Marquis? Arthur couldn't help but crease his brows in confusion. There was no doubt that humans in general were complicated and oftentimes hard to understand, but that had no relevance to their conversation. Sir Arthur, are you a warrior? Yes, I'm a warrior. Arthur answered and stifled his desire to chuckle at such a statement coming from his mouth. Then it should be obvious that the princess, a woman, can never accurately understand you. Men such as yourself, myself and His Majesty over here are kindred spirits. Marquis, more to the point please. The prince interrupted, seemingly not liking the idea of the Marquis being slow to get to the point of this. He was already displeased about doing something so humiliating to begin with. He wanted to get this over with so that he will gain a new chest that he can control. Ahem. Then I'll get right to the point. The Marquis stated he had wanted to meander around the issue for much longer to get a better understanding of Arthur, at least enough insight to know what he reacts to and what he doesn't, but no matter, or rather since he agreed to his point about the princess not understanding him, he felt confident that Arthur should not be hard to handle. His Majesty wishes for you to defect to his side and be his knight. Is that so? Arthur asked as he spared a glance at the first prince, who in turn shared a stern and a somewhat disapproving look, one that conveyed that this whole meeting was a farce and that the prince clearly did not like that he had begged a commoner to be on his side. Yes, unlike the princess, His Majesty here has not only more to offer you, but he also has more freedom of movement. As such, with him you are less likely to be stuck in the castle for long periods of time. He explained. Unlike the other 2 princes, Renner was actually much more restricted from moving. A majority of her time is spent in the castle and hardly ever leaves beyond the castle's perimeter, and likewise as her knight and protector Arthur is required to be by her side. Of course there are exceptions, like his own personal time, doing errands for her, or his most recent monster hunting under the request of the throne. While the giant basilisk isn't the most powerful of monsters, it was difficult enough to deal with that the guild had struggled finding the right adventurers for the job. Most adamantite adventurers were too far away and those who were close were already busy, while the guild can just send a mid-level subjugation squad of adventurers to overwhelm the beast they couldn't, since most resources were spent to help in rebuilding an Yggdrassil and a lot of money went into paying the adventurers after the undead incident, so the problem of the giant basilisk was handled by the crown, which Arthur had volunteered to do. Arthur gave a nod. What he said was certainly true, at least true enough, although it's not like he was very social in his past life, so not going outside is hardly something he'd consider undesirable, although he has been feeling more thirsty for battle and such, but sparring with Gazef satisfies that urge at least enough that he doesn't need to seek it out. Not only that, but among the royal family his majesty here is by far the most connected, having connections with many individuals of interest. This means he knows individuals that know about artifacts and magic items that I'm sure would be useful to you. This started to feel like a sales pitch. The Marquis took a sip from the glass of wine at the table, allowing all that he said to sink in and let Arthur digest it. He knew that anyone who fights monsters will always find magic items and artifacts as invaluable boons, since a good magic item can mean the difference between life and death, an item that decreases the damage done by a critical hit, or one that increases his strength for a specific amount of time, were things warriors like Arthur lived for. Interesting, very tempting offers. I have no doubt you'd provide me with plenty of items to nurture my strength, however. He paused. In all honesty, those were cool things and all, but he didn't really care for them. If a person is truly strong, then artifacts and magic items are not that necessary. I don't really care for them, and honestly there's not a thing you and the prince can offer that would make me come to your side, so this entire conversation was pointless. He explained himself whilst preparing to stand up. He only came here to give these two-face, since it would be disrespectful to not respond to a summons from them. He didn't have any reason to make enemies out of the nobles. Unfortunately, the prince seemed to take his words as an insult. You would spit in the generosity of a prince such as myself. Barbro stood up, his face revealing his emotions. He had listened to this farce long enough. For him to entertain this idea of begging for help from a mere knight was already testing the limits of his patience, yet this commoner still chooses to throw his generosity back at his face. To work for princess such as himself is an honor in itself. We were already offering you far more than you deserve, knave. You think just because you have some value that you can simply say no. Don't overestimate your worth. You're nothing but a piece that is to be used for our gain. You are nothing but a tool, understand? A tool for us to use. Now accept what we are offering so that I can get the throne. The prince explained, his towering figure staring at Arthur with clear arrogance and annoyance. He did not like it when those beneath their station acted as if they had any rights to refuse him. My prince purr. The Marquis could not finish his sentences. All of a sudden there was a scream from outside the room, followed by sounds of someone falling, and before he could say anything his body stiffed as hard as rock and beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. The same could be said for the prince, who had to stumble back in fear as his body screamed at him that he was in danger. Arthur stared at the prince in silence, his eyes focusing at him. His face seemed calm and collected without a hint of emotion, but it was clear that he did not like what Barbro had said. Being straight up told to your face that you are a tool and aren't allowed to say no brought rage to his eyes. Rich assholes always believed themselves above others, and Arthur never liked that. His aura flared and drowned the entire room in a thick unseen miasma of a demon lord, one that forced the two individuals to nearly soil themselves. At least one of them nearly did. The Marquis, heart beat like a drum on his chest, and his long-dulled warrior instinct screamed at him to bend the knee and show subservience if he wishes to live. He felt like his lungs were filled with water as he struggled to breathe properly, his vision becoming blurry as he barely resisted going down to his knees. Could you repeat your words, Your Highness? The prince remained silent. He didn't choose to stay silent but was too struck by fear to do so. Seeing this, Arthur shrugged and sighed before standing up and turning his back and walking away. Opening the door, he was met with a passed-out maid that he soiled herself. Damn, I should learn to control that better, he said before retracting his aura and stepping over the maid and going to get some help for her. Demon Lord's hotkey was another skill he recently discovered he had, which basically confirmed that he probably got the skills randomly rather than having wished for them, although he didn't know how many he had. In the room behind him, the Marquis gasped as he took in a deep breath and coughed due to the sudden fast intake of air. Wobbling over to the couch, he let himself fall on it and took out a handkerchief to wipe his sweat. Barbro, on the other hand, stood over a puddle of his own fluids as his eyes were rolled back with his mouth gaped open. He had fainted standing up. What was that thing? What is he? He questioned as he felt that he was slowly calming down. Did we let a demon enter the castle? He could not answer that question posed by himself. However, one thing was certain: Renner gasped with something monstrously dangerous some Gazef can never contend with. Taking a look at Barbro, the Marquis sighed. Hopefully he won't remember this. I wanted to explain further on the part of the guild having to pay adventurers and not the kingdom, but that explanation would have strayed too far from the conversation, so for now just know the nobles often interfere when it comes to either funding the guild or spending money for the guild. I'll try and explain this in detail in later chapters if I don't forget about it. Y'all are probably not gone like the next chapter. Join my Patreon, there's some free stuff there. If you enjoy my work you probably enjoy the free content there. Patreon.com, Young Master Dio. Shinam_sensational creators thoughts. 12 comments 0 vote. Is he a player? Renner walked through the halls of the castle wearing her regular outfit, which was pale blue dress that was short-sleeved. The previous outfit she had worn to the dungeon had been burned and her hands scrubbed clean on any blood, plus she added an extra layer of perfume to mask the scent of blood, removing any trace or smell that should not be found in a noble lady. Nazzarick walked just behind her with a contemplative look on his face. The guards they had with them stayed behind in the dungeon. The princess's face was locked in a perpetual smile, a grin that stretched quite wide and was forcing her to consciously put effort to not show her true smile. The reason for her mood was due to confirming that the gods worshipped in the slain theocracy were indeed individuals who crossed over from another world just like Arthur. She also learned a new term from Khajiit that had turned her mood from good to great and forced the perpetual grin on her face. A player, Arthur might be a player. She thought, Khajiit knew a lot about the theology and history of the slain theocracy, from before the 6 great gods appeared to after their deaths, and with single touch from her he spilled all that she wanted to know and more. Now she had good reasons to believe that her knight was quite possibly a god of equal power to the 6 great gods of the theocracy. This information meant that now Renner had to do all in her power to ensure that Arthur was hers and hers alone. Knowing what she knows now about Arthur, she felt a sense of possessiveness. Sister. Yes, what is it, brother? Nazzarick found himself taken aback as heard his sister respond to him in an unusually cheery attitude. She usually responded more subdued and calm, always making sure her thoughts and feelings were known only to herself, yet here, right now, the amount of glee in her voice was palpable. Why were you so interested in the theocracy's religion? It's not something I had thought you'd be interested in. It was nothing but a minor curiosity, brother, something akin to expanding my knowledge about our neighboring countries. You seem far too elated for that to be the case. After you received the information from Khajiit your mood shifted greatly. Is that how it seemed to you? I'm afraid you were just imagining things. Nazzarick squinted his eyes as he looked at the back of her head. He could tell clearly that she was happier than usual and she walked with a more sloppy posture as a result of that. It was almost like her attention was somewhere else, as a noble lady posture is important. It shows discipline, and in Nazzarick's personal opinion, which a majority of the noblemen would agree with, a refined lady with great posture was quite beautiful. Is that so? I suppose I did. Moving on, I do have to thank you for showing me an effective torture technique. I was of the opinion that bodily harm with various weapons was the best way, but it seems I was wrong. Nazzarick complimented. Although he was surprised to know his sister was capable of such cruelty, it wasn't something he didn't expect of her. In fact, his surprise was more about the method she used than her knowing how to torture. This did remind him that she was indeed a bit messed up in the head. She was certainly different from most noble women. It also made it clear that neither her nor Barbro should rule the kingdom. Glad I could help. She responded, and they returned to their silent walk, as they rounded a corner and now made their way to her chambers and saw Arthur already standing beside the door, which caused Renner to move a bit quicker. Nazzarick noted this change in pace and again squinted his eyes as he tried to keep up. Arthur could not help but smile as he saw her approach. Her wide smile and sparkling blue eyes conveyed an emotion from her that she went at great lengths to hide. Elation. She still hid her sadistic-like smile, but the joy in her face was present. Seeing such a thing, he hoped that it was because of him that she was happy. I should try and subtly bring it up. He reminded himself, much like with everyone, Renner always hid her true feelings. Not even her father can accurately tell what she's feeling most of the time. As such, Arthur thought it would be only fair that she be able to relax around him and show her true emotions. What she was showing right now as she approached him was close but still hid a lot. This feeling of elation was a first for her. She hardly remembered a time where there was something that brought her so much joy. Perhaps before her mother died, or when she was too young to remember anything, but after then she can't recall anything to make her so happy. The moment she could count to 100 was the moment she realized what her life would be like, so there was hardly anything to be happy about. A caged bird may dream of flying, but it does so at its own detriment. Fortunately for Renner, she has a reason to be happy right now. If before she thought she could use Arthur to carefully maneuver and take charge of her own life, before Arthur she had been trying to find a way to escape this life and go somewhere she can live without worrying about anything, but now she thinks differently. Her goals are starting to change. Good afternoon, your majesties. Arthur greeted the two royals with a bow, with the both of them acknowledging it by nodding to his greeting. Thanks for the escort, brother, my knight will take it from here. Very well, excuse me then, Sir Arthur. Xanac turned on his heels and walked away, while Arthur opened the doors to Renner's chambers and let the princess enter before following behind her and closing the door. You seem rather happy today, princess, did something happen? Indeed, I found some very interesting things that I wish to discuss with you. Renner said as such and took her seat at the table. She took one that would allow her to face Arthur, and coincidentally the window would be behind her and thus the light from the setting sun would shine behind her, creating a rather pleasant image of the princess smiling genuinely. Arthur could not help but smile back to her as he once again was reminded of her mesmerizing beauty. Forgive me if I sound rude, princess, but seeing a genuine smile from you truly does enhance your beauty by tenfold. Oh my. It's been a month since you've been my knight, are you just now showing interest in me? She asked, maintaining her smile. However inwardly she was confused. She was certain that her smile was perfect enough to fool even the most observant of individuals. Even Marquis Raven only knew about her true smile because she had let it slip when she was a child, so she was certain Arthur could not tell, or at least she assumed he wouldn't. It was imperative that his image of her was positive, otherwise she wouldn't be able to control him. She had nearly let her smile slip for a moment before and he saw a glimpse of it, but he didn't seem put off by it, so maybe it was fine. I suppose you could choose to interpret my statement like that if you want, he said as he let out a sigh and walked over to take a seat. He was hoping she would react to what he said just a bit. He purposely added the phrase, genuine smile, so that she would know what he was talking about. Her poker face was immaculate. So you aren't denying it? I'm not confirming it either. Hey, I hope you realize that when you don't deny something you're practically agreeing to it, so you've told me all I need to know. She teased, ending her statement with a melodious giggle, one that would be expected from a beautiful princess. Perhaps that was my intention all along. Arthur expressed as an obvious smirk appeared on his lips. This caused Renner to pause for a bit as she realized that he may actually be serious. Of course this wasn't a problem. Using his interest in her as a way to control him was not completely out of the question. In fact, she had considered it before and was more than willing to do it. However, there was a danger now that she was aware of. Arthur is probably a player, an individual akin to a god. Should she mess up and he find out that she's been trying to manipulate him, it won't just end with her death. However, this danger only compounded on her desire to keep him by her side. She didn't understand herself, but maybe she craved the power he had, or perhaps it was a way to secure her own safety in case he becomes a problem in the future. Regardless, whichever it was, one thing was certain: it's imperative that her relationship with Arthur be more than just princess and her knight, and her plan on making him emotionally reliant on her was a go. She suppressed a blush once she again realized what that would eventually entail, if his interest in her was genuine. You've become quite famous after that undead incident in Yggdrassil. Indeed, I have, and as a result of that many nobles have been a nuisance to me. Arthur complained and decided to not bring up the fact that she changed the topic of conversation. He figured that she was embarrassed and decided not to pursue the matter, although it was true that it's been a month since he met her, so it was about time that he made his move at least. I apologize for that, but it was a natural outcome of your achievements, plus we've achieved two of our intended goals. She stated. Arthur has garnered the attention of the nobles and many are currently scrambling to get him on their side. This has successfully turned Arthur into a political tool with great value. The second achievement is that he has gained fame amongst the commoners. While that didn't necessarily translate to influence by itself, but if you added with Arthur's reputation within the noble court, then that means now Arthur was a person of importance not to be ignored, and it was more than enough to give some political power, which was the main goal. Once the nobles realize that Arthur cannot be bought, at least she's hoping he can't, they'll try to form alliances with her or give some backing to make her presence firm in the noble court. I suppose, but what now? I haven't met any would-be spies and the assassination attempts have stopped. True, but you can forget about the spies. In fact, they're no longer important, they'll show themselves eventually. She instructed. The spies for the most part will come by themselves. Renner was currently thinking of something else. With Arthur by her side, she let the thoughts of becoming queen pass through her mind once again. She didn't like being compromising, but with Arthur at her side it would be easy to rule. She may not love the kingdom, but it is her home at least. Fair enough. Arthur agreed. The spies within the kingdom will most likely not approach, at least not until they have gathered the necessary information on him and are confident on the prize they want to dangle in his face. Now that's out of the way, can I ask you a question? Renner leaned forward, her eyes staring into his emerald-colored ones, conveying the slight seriousness of her question. However, Arthur smirked and responded to her words. That's a question. This caused Renner to look at him with slight annoyance, but ultimately decided not to address the childishness of his response. I wanted to ask you. Now hold up, I didn't agree to being asked the question. Renner could only give him a deadpan stare as she watched him exhale through his nose in amusement. This was the first time he'd been this playful with her, so she took that as a good sign. Are you a player? Arthur's eyebrows shot up in shock, as he hadn't expected such a question from her. Although he did figure that she would probably research the whole thing about him being from another world, he didn't expect it to be so soon. In a sense you could say yes. He aptly responded. Thinking about it further, Arthur came to the realize that Ainz didn't exactly make it a point to keep the concept of player a secret. He mentioned it whenever necessary, plus not mention the 6 great gods were players, so they probably threw the word around even in the presence of their subjects, plus the Creed Kings probably did the same, and since Khajiit was captured, Renner got the information about players from him. He figures some record of the 6 great gods saying the word player to refer to themselves or someone else. All in all, the concept of player wasn't really that much of an unknown secret. If one searched for it, they'd find it. I see. Then does that mean you are a godlike being? And are of equal power to the 6 great gods of the slain theocracy? That remains to be seen. He responded. He decided to be vague about it. There are many things he didn't know about himself and the powers he held. The world of Overlord had individuals with quite the op skills. Not only does he need to find out his skills, but he needs to master them, like for instance mastering Sukuna's technique and domain expansion. That will be very useful. I guess some of y'all probably have some feelings about this chapter, so go ahead, express yourselves. 6 comments, 0 vote. Ire of the prince. Please. I'm sorry. Please don't take me. Please. I'll do anything. A disheveled woman with black, dirty hair cried out. Pure and raw desperation was conveyed in her screams. Her eyes showed a great sadness, like she had lost her child. She used her arms to hold on to the door as hard as she could. No one was trying to pull her away, yet she hung on to it like her life depended on it. Got any spells for this shorty? A giant of a lady wearing crimson armor and a huge hammer in her shoulder questioned her short stack of a teammate, Evely, and she could only shake her head. Seeing such desperation from an individual stirred feelings or pity in her. The cynical side of her nearly suggested that they leave this woman where she was, but of course they couldn't do that. She was the only one responsive to our arrival, the rest of them might as well be dead. Gagaron once again spoke. Her feminine yet somewhat manly voice reached the ears of her teammates, who could only silently acknowledge her words. The adventurer Team Blue Rose has been doing its best to investigate the organization that is 8 Fingers. It's an effort to stop the criminal organization and protect the people of the kingdom. After the incident with the undead in Rantel, they quickly scrambled to search for the 8 Finger bases that produce the drug known as Black Dust, a drug so powerful that it basically robbed you of your free will. They arrived on this base mere hours ago. The base was disguised as a border town to ward off any suspicion. The townspeople mentioned were fed black dust and forced to work, and any children were transferred somewhere else. Blue Rose took care of any of the personnel from 8 Fingers and told all other townspeople who were still sane to flee, while they searched the place, which led them to find the storage facility that housed hundreds of live bodies. However, despite being alive, the bodies laid flaccid on the floor as if dead. Lachias, what do we do? Evely questioned their leader. However, Lachias took too much longer to respond to her, as her mind was occupied by various feelings, one of pity and sadness, disgusting and most of all rage. 8 Fingers as an organization had to go down by all means. She clenched her fist hard and took a deep breath. If she doesn't want us to take her with us, there's nothing we can do. The only way to solve these things is to find out the locations where Black Dust is being kept. She explained as she turned on her heels and walked away, prompting her friends to follow behind her. Despite her logic and seemingly calm outward appearance, they were aware that this would be a sleepless night for Lachias. Her heart bled too much for others. Tia, did you get anything useful? Yes, we did, fiendish boss. We also got a ton of loot. The twins spoke in unison, something they hardly ever do. They usually prefer to speak after each other. Good, we'll go back to the base, process and share the information we've gathered. And maybe see Arthur again. What? What are you talking? Oh come on, Lachias. We've all seen how handsome the guy is, even I've wanted to hit the sack with him. What? No. I'm not like that, he just has some interesting stories to tell. Gagaron teased, causing their leader to flush and become flustered. In the past month they've seen Arthur a couple of times and had time to converse with him, with Lachias being the one who speaks to him the most. Apparently he seemed to understand the Holy Valkyrie stuff she usually speaks about when she's by herself. Not to mention, he's got blonde hair and green eyes. You were basically made for each other. Evely spoke with a shrug and a shake of her head, causing Lachias to stammer, trying to deny the allegations. While she did enjoy the fantastical tales he shared with her when they were in the princess's chambers, their relationship was just friendly acquaintances so far. Fiendish boss, fight. Don't give up, fiendish boss. The twins cheered her on, causing a deeper shade of pink to stain her cheeks, but decided to give up trying to deny their accusations as doing so seemed to make it worse. On a serious note, I'm glad you finally got someone to help you with the trouble with the sword. I wouldn't want it to suddenly take over your body. Evely mentioned, however this caused Lycias to blush much harder than before, her whole face covered in red like a cherry tomato as she tried her best to not feel embarrassed about what was said. Hey, yeah. She responded, trying her hardest not to have the conversation go any further. If they ever found out that this was all just pretend, she'd die of embarrassment, not to mention they'd lose all respect they had of her. They'll never find out, I swear upon the holy Valkyrie. She thought as she walked while also being embarrassed by her own thoughts. Next day. The time of day was early afternoon, the clock had only struck 12 a few minutes ago and the king's personal office now housed 2 marquis and 1 margrave of the royalty faction, as well as Gazef who stood right next to the king who was seated on a chair behind his desk. The 3 men sat on a couch that was facing towards the king and one of them, an elderly gentleman with grey hairs, drank his tea elegantly, making a point to show off his excellent manners, traditional style of drinking tea which involved keeping one's pinky finger straight as he drank. The man was Margrave Yarovana. Besides him was a young, handsome man who looked to be no older than the princess, only older than her by a few years. In contrast to the Margrave, who seemed to be relaxed in the presence of the king. Marquis Pespi was slightly tense, his respect for the crown could not let him show any disrespect to the throne. Why exactly do you wish to push forward the date? Multiple reasons, your majesty, one being the princess is now a fully grown woman, yet she still has no candidates up for marriage, no fiancé or persons she is talking with. This does not reflect well on her image. As members of the noble court, it is our duty to ensure the name of the royal family is not tarnished in any way. Marquis Blumrush explained whilst brushing his whiskey mustache with his fingers, a self-grooming gesture born from the insecurity that he could not grow it any longer and that it will forever stay 2 patchy wisps of hair on his face. I understand what you're saying, but Renner's marriage was pushed back because she's the one who controls it. This is the reward she asked for when her plans successfully put us through the drought 6 years ago. King Ramposa III explained. He was very much aware that his daughter was much brighter than the average noble, but unfortunately as a woman there was hardly anything she could be involved in, so she can only take the back seat in most things with some exceptions. Your Majesty, please understand that circumstances have changed. If we don't push forward the date, the other nobles just might snatch the prize from under our noses. Margrave Yarovana spoke. While it was all well and good to keep one's promises, he understood that there are situations where one cannot be expected to keep them. You're speaking about Sir Arthur? Yes, your majesty, Marquis Baloop and a few others have already made their attempts to poach him from the princess. In order to prevent this we need the princess to marry, that way we can block the other nobles from trying anything. Margrave Yarovana continues, when a woman with some political power, influence or something that most nobles would want, like land or something similar, when she marries, that political power is transferred from her to her husband. This means any talks regarding that matter would need to go through her husband first. As such, since Arthur is a political tool much like Gazef, if Renner were to marry, her husband would basically become the one who could command Arthur, and any noble that wished to talk to Arthur would require permission from Renner's husband. So this is more about keeping the other nobles from taking away a valuable asset than it is about Renner's marriage. I see. The king understood. When it came to women and political power within the noble society of the Re-Estais kingdom, it would be safe to say that women didn't get much political power. Their status is determined by the man they're married to, and even then that only matters to other women. There are exceptions, of course, like if her husband died and there was no male heir of age. However, it's not impossible for a woman to amass political power without getting married. It just depends on where they're at in the hierarchy, like, for instance, if that woman is a princess. Although having the princess marry will take away that political power, so in essence, these nobles of the royal faction want control over Arthur and simultaneously keep the princess from gaining too much power. I hear what you gentlemen are saying. I'll bring this up to her when I see her again. So which candidates do you think would be suitable? Do you have any? Yes, we do, your majesty. The young Marquis Pespi is more than willing. His father, before passing, was already preparing to have talks with about pairing him with the princess. Margrave Yarovana explained, causing the young noble beside him to tense up as now the attention was on him. Of course he wouldn't consider himself shy, however he could not help but be nervous whenever he was before the king. I see. Are you willing to do this, Marquis? Of course, your majesty. Princess Renner is the jewel of the country. It would be nothing but an honor for me to not only be married to a member of the royal family but to be married to her as well. I thank you for being willing to grant me this opportunity, and I assure you that I will do my utmost because to ensure that the princess is not only happy but satisfied, I will endeavor. The king raised his hand and forced the young Marquis to stop speaking as it seemed he was beginning to ramble. You've made your point, Marquis. I will have a talk with Renner and bring this matter up. She'll be angry since I will be breaking a promise, but I'm certain she'll understand. The king said as he let out a sigh, being a good king always came before being a good father. If the world were made the way he wanted, he could be the good father he wishes to be, but unfortunately he couldn't. In the meantime. Bang. Father. I request for that commoner filth that guards Renner to be executed. Babro slammed the doors open with a righteous fury, interrupting the meeting. His eyes were red with anger, and his veins showed in his forehead. It was clear that something or someone had crossed him. The words he uttered brought a thick silence into the room. What? Everyone in the room exclaimed in unison, completely befuddled by the nonsense that came out of Barbro's mouth. Hopefully, there aren't too many grammatical errors in this chapter. Any thoughts on the chapter? Any criticisms? Help me improve and make this a better story.